Hi everyone, welcome to this demo video about Matrice. I will do an overview of the module first and we'll get into more interesting patching later. The Matrix section has 3 inputs and 3 outputs. Any of the inputs can be distributed to any of the outputs. To do so, we got a dedicated attenuator for each input-output pairs. So we got 1 to A, 1 to B, 1 to C, 2 to A, and so on. The Matrix section also features inversion switches. When set to middle position, they're set to off. They can be set to pre, which is pre-matrix. So in this case, input 1 will be inverted before going to the attenuator array. Or it can be set to post, and in this case it's output A which is inverted after the matrix summing, and there's one for each input-output pairs as well. Each outputs of the matrix are normalized to 3 VCAs. In video, the VCA will essentially be a fade to black. It will control the amplitude of the signal, which translates to contrast. When no CV is plugged into the VCA CV inputs, the knobs act as attenuator, going from max amplitude, max contrast to minimum to no signal or black. As soon as a signal is plugged into the CV inputs, the knob now acts as a CV attenuator, so it will adjust the amplitude of the signal going to VCA CV, which in itself control the amplitude of the signal going to the VCA inputs. Indicated by arrows are the normalization on the inputs. So input 1 is normalized to input 2, input 2 is normalized to input 3, meaning that plugging a signal in input 1 will also send it to input 2 and to input 3 until jack is plugged on the inputs, which will override the normalization. We got a similar setup on the VCA CV, so a single signal plugged into VCA CV A will go to VCA CV B and VCA CV C. The output of the matrix mixer are normalized to the input of the VCA, meaning that it is also possible to use another processing module after the matrix and going back to the VCA after the processing. So the matrix section and VCA are completely independent. As the color of the knob suggests, Matrice is really powerful as a RGB processor just before an encoder, and that's how I use it most of the time. But it's definitely possible to use it also to pre-process the signal before going to another kind of processor like Solaire and Seuil, and so it will act more on the content of the video rather than the final colors, because the color will be defined by the process of one of those two modules, for example. And let's get to some patching now. Let's have a look at the matrix section first. We'll do a simple patch to do so. I'll get a linear shape from ramp into Seuil to generate a hard key, a hard shape which doesn't only have minimum or maximum value and no value in between. So we got a red rectangle because we're using the rectangle output and going to the red inputs of sortie. We'll go to input 1 on Matrice and then connect the VCA outputs into the encoder. And right now the VCA are in max position. The VCA knobs are in max position. There's no CV here, so it's essentially a path through. If I send it to the red inputs, to the red channel, we get a red rectangle again, but we can add a little bit into the green as well, and we get a orange or yellow, then a little bit to the blue. We got kind of washed out pink, and the signal is normalized to the two other channels. However, right now it's not super interesting because we are sending the same signal to the outputs, to the same output, so it just like increase the red as well. However, where it gets interesting is using the switches, the inversion switches. If I invert the second channel, this will now be the outer part of the rectangle that I can choose the color. Get some kind of blue teal. And we can add a bit of modulation into Seuil to have something that moves a bit. The triangle wave from animate, which is set at audio rate, which gives this slow vertical modulation. Of course, we got 3 inputs, so it's probably more interesting if we plug more signal into Seuil. And then let's get this one here. And alright, we now got 4 colors, different colors, because we got 2 signal with 2 value each. And let's add a third shape into Seuil, and from Seuil into Matrice. And now we don't have any level in here. And yeah, now we got a couple more colors. Can invert. I really like the invert switches to really like change the overall color palette. We can have a look at how it looks without the matrix mixer in between. As you can see, it's really red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, yellow, black and white, because yeah, there's only 8 possible value, and all the signal are at max value. And yeah, that's where going through the matrix mixer for RGB processing is interesting to me, because you'll be able to reach out all those different colors. And yeah, looks pretty good. The matrix section allows us to reach other color shades. However, we still have plain colors since we are using odd edge signals. That's where the VCA after comes handy. If we are fading to black using another signal, we'll, like one of the output of Seuil, the shift output, which stays linear, we'll get some fading happening, which gives a little bit of linearity back, and we can XOR all 3 outputs to get something that involve all 3 signals. Let's increase the frequency. And maybe we can send the signal from Seuil into Solaire, and from Solaire back into the CV. And as you can see, we got some rectification going, so there's an emphasis on the pattern. We now have an external video source plugged into Entrée, and we'll get the Y output, the black and white output, into Matrice, the matrix section. And as previously, from a monochrome image, we can get another monochrome image to which we can set the overall color tone, and we can invert what's going to the other channel to get a duochrome picture. We can also see how RGB yields more colors. If we turn all the inversion off, and we get the original picture back, but that's not what we want. We want it to be different. And as you can see, since all three channels can go up to 3 volts, 3 times 1 volt, the picture can be pretty bright with really saturated colors. So what we can do is send the Y output from Entrée into Solaire and use a rectified version of it as a fade to black. And now we got some fading happening. We can invert the fade to black and maybe add some modulation from animated to Solaire to get something a little more interesting. I really like how Solaire and Matrice plays together, as you've seen in the previous section. So now I'll do it with the shapes generated from ramp, and going into the matrix and using successive outputs into R, G, and B. And we get the kind of classic color scheme we have with the chain rectification. We have a little more control that going directly from Solaire's output into the encoder. And yeah, adding the false output as a fade to black really changed really cuts into the shape, into the colors, and adding a little bit of modulation, inverting the signals. We can add more shapes into Solaire to get something a bit more complex. Until now, we've seen how Matrice can be used as a RGB processor or color processor, because it was sitting just before the encoder, and so it had the final decision on the color content. But it's definitely possible to use it to mix some ramps and shapes from ramp before going into another processor. As always, Solaire. So getting the outputs of Matrice, of the VCA, into Solaire, and then the outputs of Solaire into the encoder. And so now Matrice has the control over the content of the patch. and Solaire acts on the content as well, but mostly changes the colors. And we got control over each of the 3 signals that are sent to Solaire. And we can use LFO again to modulate the amplitude before it goes to Solaire. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this Matrice video. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next demo video.